Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I am the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Why did I start laughing? I have no idea. Maybe it's because this is the 480-something time I said that intro, plus bonus episodes. How is everyone doing? Is everyone vaxxed yet, or on their way to being fully vaxxed? I walked around yesterday for the first time without a mask on outside, walking Mabel just around the block, and the looks I got probably... Okay, let me put it this way. The looks that I got that I turned into something negative in my head. They were probably neutral looks that then my brain translated into, like, these people think I'm like some kind of MAGA chud. Or like I'm screaming about being anti-science or QAnon or something. That's what I felt like in my head after a year of wearing a mask outside. Hey, but the CDC guidelines say you can wear a mask outside if there's not a lot of people around. So, try it, unless you don't feel comfortable. But you know what I do feel comfortable with? Today's episode. What a great transition that was. Hey, they don't call me the Segway King for nothing. Today's episode, last week was Matt Sweeney, and this week, Clay Tarver. If you don't know who Clay is, why don't I read you his bio right now. Musician and TV writer Clay Tarver first came to prominence as the co-founder and lead guitarist of the Boston hard rock/punk band Bullet LaVolta in the late 1980s. They recorded a few records for Tang, RCA, and Matador Records before disbanding in 1991. He then formed Chavez with Matt Sweeney, Scott Marshall, and James Lowe, and they released 2 incredible albums and an EP on Matador. As Chavez was waning, Clay's writing career started to take off. Around this time, he wrote Joyride with J.J. Abrams, and later, Clay wrote for all 6 seasons of Silicon Valley. His directorial film debut, Vacation Friends, with John Cena, Lil Rel Howery, and Yvonne Orji, will be released this summer. I think June. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I really like this talk a lot. I felt like Clay and I are kind of on the same emotional and creative wavelength. Obviously, he is a much more successful version of me, but I felt some kind of kinship with him. And we talked about some interesting stuff about growing up in Texas and his parents and their artistic inclinations and the early days of his musical career and even his writing career. So I hope you enjoy this. If you do and you want to check out other episodes of the show, you can get them wherever you get your podcast from. I think all of them are there on Spotify. Not that I endorse that as the one to go to, but that's just, for whatever reason, I think they all show up on Spotify. I don't know how the RSS feed works. What I like to do here in the beginning, though, is a little RIYL, recommended if you like. So if you like Clay Tarver, if you like Chavez, well, obviously, check out last week's episode with Matt Sweeney. But especially in quarantine, now that I'm doing the show over Zoom, I've been talking to tons of cool musicians that do not live in Los Angeles. Ian Mackay has been on the show recently, Mary Timony, Thurston Moore. Talked to Colin Newman from Wire a couple years ago. That was a really fun talk. So check those out. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe to the show on Apple, or I guess, are they changing it to following now? You can follow the show on Apple, on Stitcher, on Audible/Amazon, Google, the aforementioned Spotify, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Got some great episodes coming up. I'm very excited. Isabel Campbell from Belle and Sebastian. I just talked to her and she was really wonderful. International folk sensation Peggy Seeger, the sister of Pete Seeger. Terry Riley, the man who changed modern composition in the 20th century. Robert Popper, who one of my favorite creative voices in comedy, a British TV writer and performer. I just talked to him, and it was brilliant. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Clay. Can I go back for a second to you waking up at 5 a.m? Because you said that was like as you got older.
Yes.
You're now waking up at 5 a.m, and I'm kind of curious about that because my sleep, I can't tell if it's the pandemic or if it is as I get older, my sleep has become more, I was going to say problematic, as if my sleep was saying like racist words. But my sleep has become more troubled. Like I just like wake up all the time and
it's a challenge. You're right. Because when you get older, things like that would make you happy and make you feel good become harder to achieve just by some sort of weird, cruel twist of aging. And then everyone I know who's been going through this pandemic, I don't know what it is. No one can sleep. And it's weird because everyone on the one hand is like feeling this nice sense of like simplicity and enjoying like the simple life. And I've certainly enjoyed a lot more of it than I thought I would. Like I don't even think I had FOMO particularly, but life was kind of nice with a complete absence of it. Like that's one upside. Oh, yeah. I never feel it's so nice to know that everyone's in the same boat, especially for some reason in LA. It's like, it was always such a struggle to get together with people. And I always like beat myself up for not making more of an effort. I used to have a joke that like, in New York, you walk down the street, you could say, hey, run into someone and say, hey, let's grab a beer.
Yeah.
And in LA, to get a beer with someone, you have to invite them to the prom, like 2 months in advance, and then in written invitation form. And it's been nice to not just realize everyone's in the same boat, but there must be something about like the lack of stimulation or something. I don't know what it is. It's like, all stories for the last 40 years have been about too much stimulation. Well, now I can't sleep. I have so much less stimulation and now I can't sleep. So what the fuck?
It's the whole New York thing, but it's one of the reasons why we really don't like Los Angeles. I mean, we've been here for 3.5 years now, but it's like,
sorry to hear it.
It's where the work is. But I on one hand though, I like being here in the pandemic. Yeah. Because it is so much easier. We actually like the city way more in the pandemic. Yeah. And also I like the lack of professional expectations. We have work. Like Naomi was just in a Zoom room. I'm writing a movie. We still doing podcasting. We have work, but there's no like, if I don't get staffed this year, I don't feel bad about it.
Right. You have this perfect kind of excuse because we're all in it.
Yeah.
We moved out here because we had twins in New York, and I lived in New York for 15 years, and I was one of these assholes that walked around New York every day going, isn't this great?
Yes.
And then there was this writer's strike in 2007, and my wife and I had just had twins and had a third, and we were just like, I realized like if the strike went on for like any time at all, I would just be financially liquidated. And of course it ended up going much longer than that. It was a significant strike, and I was a feature writer. And so we just abruptly moved to LA, and she had lived there at one point. And I cried on the plane. I was so sad to leave New York.
Yeah.
But then when I got there, it was like, I had all this shame and I felt like a failure that I couldn't keep my shit together enough to stay where I wanted to live. And maybe I overreached and all this stuff. And then the recession, not only did the strike go on, but then the recession hit. And I felt so much better knowing that everyone else had the same, the whole world had the problem that I had, which is like, financial pressures. And suddenly I felt a lot better. And it's sort of like that here. It's great to just, like, everyone's ambition is kind of tempered a little bit by the circumstance. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't stop some people from posting deadline articles, but
they're dicks.
Wait, are shame and guilt are some of my primary emotions. Are they the same? Are they the same kinds for you?
I identified with you right away.
I mean, we'll see after year 8 of therapy if we can do something about that. But
no, they're useless emotions, but they're my friends.
Is that have they been your lifelong friends? Have they accompanied you throughout going all the way back to
Which is
San
weird
Antonio?
because I'm fully waspy, and I don't know how I got the weird Texas gentleman version of shame and guilt. It's slightly different than like Catholic guilt or Jewish guilt or anything like that. It's this weird, like my dad was this sort of Texas gentleman guy who, believed in honor and it was a sort of primitive form of people pleasing, and it works. It's great for a while. And it worked great for him. I don't know.
Do you think that's why he was doing it to be a people pleaser?
No, I think, well, yes, but no. But I just think this is how you're supposed to behave. And this is, you're supposed to make everyone feel comfortable and do everything and always do the right thing. And it just was drilled into my head a little bit. But it's these are the things that make us who we are, right?
Yeah, it's funny.
Fortunately or unfortunately.
I describe my parents all the time on this show as waspy Jews, and I never thought, not because and I always add the addendum that very loving household, except we just didn't talk about emotions, and that's why I use the adjective waspy. And then I never thought they would listen. The last time I found out that I thought that the last time they mentioned a podcast, they thought it was a video. So I knew that they had never, I've been doing this show for almost 11 years. And then somehow they found out that I used that phrase, waspy Jews, to describe them. And then they didn't tell me that they knew that apparently they didn't like it. But then they waited 6 months and then brought it up kind of obliquely in a joke. And I'm like,
prove your point.
I'm screaming in my head. This is why I used that. This is why I used that adjective, because obviously you were bothered by it, but you didn't want to say, "Hey, why did you say that?" Or like, "Hey, please don't say that about us," or whatever. I don't even know what their actual problem with it is, but I'm kind of curious. Is that the same? Like, did you grow up in that kind of household where it's the same? Again, very loving, but also just like you didn't. Emotions were just off the plate.
I grew up in an interesting house. Both my parents are artists. My dad, both my parents were very talented artists. My dad also had a day job being a lawyer, but they were very involved in the arts. Both very good painters, and they. I suffer from having like a very supportive family. And so weirdly, when I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and then ended up going to school in Boston for college, Harvard. And when I got there, I was a basketball player and all this, and then ended up, through just discovering music more than ever. I was always interested in music, but started doing stuff at the radio station at school, and that's when I really sort of discovered. I'd always had an inkling about punk rock, but San Antonio's not the most like punk rock kind of place, and I'm weirdly not like a record collector type, and I was always. It was funny. I'd always played music. I grew up going. My mom put me in I guess it was the Suzuki method, Yamaha music school. So we learned, it's the famous Japanese method of teaching classical music. And so everybody learns Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in the violin. And I started that when I was like maybe first grade, maybe even before then, and played music. I played cello in orchestras and stuff all the way through, I don't know, maybe my sophomore year of high school. And it wasn't until I got to college that I sort of really immersed myself in punk rock and, the subversive kind of music. I'd always had an interest in it, but I didn't quite know how to access it. And it was just this total immersion in that world. And then from that, I started a band with some friends from the radio station and college, and that was my first band, and it was called Bullet Revolta, and it was in Boston. And it was funny. This is a long way of saying that, like, I don't know if my parents quite understood what the fuck I was doing. But in this weird way, I kind of felt like I was, continuing in the family business a little bit, which was, they were both doing art. I was doing punk rock, but it was the creative thing. And sometimes I think they totally understood and were very excited for me. And other times I think they were like, what the hell is he doing? But in the end, they really, it was an exciting time to start a band because we were just the makeup of our group. We were kind of, I don't know, we happened to be kind of on the same sort of general tip of what ended up going on in Seattle at the same time. And so we were, we were like, our band was sort of punk rock meets hard rock, I guess, with a little metal stuff here and there, but it was real. That was just who we were. We weren't part of like really a scene of bands like that. We were kind of off on our own a little bit in Boston.
Because I was trying to think about that. I was listening to Bullet Revolta last night, and I was like, because in my mind, I don't know this. I was still in grade school at the time, but like going back, like then by the time of the 90s, like getting into the Pixies and the Lemonheads and a lot of stuff like that. To me, in my mind, that's what the Boston scene was.
Well, we were. It's. I will say this: we were. We're oddly not much in the record of the historical record, but like, which is weird because we were right there. Chavez is the total opposite. Chavez's sort of profile has grown in the years relative to what it was at the time. But La Volta, we were, the Lemonheads started at the same radio station. So they were sort of our brother band. And even though they were younger than us, they did it first. And so they sort of showed us how it was done. And we were on the same label, Tang Records, and it was the same sort of group of people. And they recorded a single and put it out before they ever played a show. And then like our first real show was with the Lemonheads and the Blake Babies in our dorm in college. And we were sort of the most aggressive of the three of those bands, but the three of us were always kind of linked together somehow. And we did really, really well in Boston, but it was funny. The Lemonheads, the first, they sort of ended up splitting up and then got an offer to go tour in Europe. And they didn't have a record or anything, so they just threw together a bunch of things. Then it was this record Lick, and they asked us to come go on tour with them. And basically, we had only had 6 songs out, and so we were like, shit, well, we'd love to go. And this is 1989, I think, and we expected like 50 people or 25 people at each show, and it was just right when American music was taking off over there, because it took off over in Europe before here. And the Pixies, were blowing up in Europe, and Dinosaur Jr. too. And so we went over, and it was just like, hundreds of people at every show. It was crazy. It was so much fun. It was the most fun I think I've ever had in my life.
Was there something? Now I'm trying to think about like the fact that we come from somewhat similar emotional backgrounds. And was there, because I started, I was playing music in high school. I got a guitar for, I think, my 16th birthday. And then I was in a band in college, and there was something I could not ever really emotionally access myself into the music. And it took much later, like going to UCB, getting into performance and therapy, and like all of that stuff together that really like opened me up. And I'm kind of curious if there was like something, because you said you also had been playing music since you were a child. When you started playing music in a band, did it allow you to emotionally open up at all? Were you able to channel? Did it do something inside you, or was it for like the same as me, where it was still trapped inside? Like if I was writing lyrics, they were behind like 10 layers of obscurity. Like I really identified with like Pavement, because I'm just like, if I'm going to write about my emotions, they're going to be under like all this poetry. So you can't really, so there's no vulnerability there.
I think the lesson of Bullet La Volta for me was accessing that emotion. So it was total emotion. Now, in retrospect, was it a little posy, I suppose, on some level, or was it a little toxic masculinity? Sort of, but that's punk rock, both of those things. And I'm very forgiving of that. The truth was, for whatever reason, while the band was very aggressive, it was like, I honestly thought we were like the best band in the world live. And we were at a certain point in time, I felt like you couldn't get any better than us live. And it was just this raw intensity. And so, yes, I completely accessed that emotion, but it was that emotion. And, it was the first time I'd ever tried to write music. And it was, you learn very quickly that whole, and if people like it, you're rewarded, and just the whole creative process of all of that, like, was so awesome, because especially after going to college and you spend your whole life like preparing to do things, to finally get to do something was super fun.
Yeah.
And to get to do something, like, I would have been thrilled had we played a Tuesday night at the Rat, which was the CBGBs of Boston. And, that was like, I when we started, I would have been like, holy shit, we made it. Like, no joke. And then, like, we literally headlined CDs, and we went to Europe, and that's what we put out records, and we eventually, after that first tour, got, the Lemonheads were signed to Atlantic, and we got signed to RCA, and it was like, it was so much bigger deal than I ever thought possible. And so having that, like, this is going to sound pretentious, but being able to go on that journey was, one of the most remarkable things in my life, because it wasn't just us. It was like, you know, all of those bands, like they were, I felt like we were all part of a class, like in school or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still friends with a lot of those people. And, you know, we all sort of had careers and had our ups and downs and struggles and reinventions and everything. And it's funny, even though I'm a writer and director now, I'm like completely still identify as a musician back to those days, because it's like, that's where I learned all of my creative chops and how to listen and how to self-edit and how to present and how to bomb on stage and fight your way into. I'm a really good person to bomb on stage with. A very good team player. If you break a string, I will be the decoy. And so your question about accessing emotion was that just this overwhelming power was very cathartic. It was not only fun as shit to play in a band that good, it was a fucking blast. It was so nice to get on stage and just be confident that we would just slay. We would overwhelm you. And that was a great feeling. But it also just was like, you know, I learned very quickly like how to tap into the beginnings of my creative whole thing by doing that, you know. Yeah. And like I said, it kind of mattered. It ended up being this opening up all these doors and being, you know, historically significant to be a part of all that.
Yeah. I mean,
that changed when our band split up and I had to reinvent myself. All of that changed, but in an interesting way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious about that. I wanted to talk about that, but I want to go back to Texas for a second, because I was thinking last night about, and I didn't know your parents, you know, were painters too, because I think there's something interesting. I can't figure out Texas necessarily, because you've got like, I was trying to think, you grew up in a time, like in my mind, I know it's not Austin, but like I'm thinking about like Linklater. I'm thinking like Slacker in some way. I know that's a little later than when you grew up, but like there's something about that flavor in Texas. Like Dave Berman grows up in Dallas, you're in San Antonio, but also, you know, it's football country. It is the, you know, this
all the Butthole Surfers were from San Antonio.
Oh yeah. That's
which
right.
made sense, because they were it made sense that it was like sort of art and completely unlike anything.
Yeah.
It was punk, but it wasn't really. It was like this whole other goofy kind of art punk.
What is it about Texas that like has all these kinds of like? Is it just the like size of the place? Like, what is it that has what's the character when you were growing up there, especially? What's the character of Texas, and what's the character of San Antonio specifically?
Well, there's a book out now about Texas punk, but again, I wasn't that involved in punk.
It doesn't have to be punk. I just mean for you, like growing
for me.
Up
I know, I know, but it was like, but you know, I always saw the heart of good culture, interesting culture, cutting edge, and subversive culture in Texas as being kind of these pockets of cool and interesting shit going on in this sort of big state, which was often very conservative, but you know, it all had sort of a dry wit to it all. And like even the country music in Austin and the, you know, Jerry Jeff Walker and Willie Nelson and all those guys, all that outlaw stuff was like, there was like just this kick-ass taste to it, and it was subversive, and it had this wit to it all, and you know, Austin was really kind of a hippie town in the pocket of, in the seat of power, like any you know, capital city and university city, but there was something in Texas that, to me, like my parents lived these really interesting lives, but they were always sort of part of the loyal opposition in a way. They didn't mind ruffling feathers, but they would do it in sort of personal, subversive way. Like many of their, a lot of their friends were really open-minded when it came to art, but like their families thought, what the hell are you doing? I mean, this is crazy. They were very comfortable with that tension, and so for me, like I always felt like it like when I went off to play music, everyone was excited because back home I felt all this support, but I would always be like, you're not going to like it. Like, you don't have to show up at my shows. This is not for you. It's not going to be. And I think people kind of understood it. And then when you could sort of measure it, like, oh, you're putting out records. Oh, you're touring. Oh, we can read about you here and there. It gave them it was authorized that it was an okay thing. And then once the world changed and all the bands that we had been playing with were suddenly the bands, everything flipped from you're crazy to have been doing that to like, oh, wow. So it was, in Texas to me, I still connect to it so much. I mean, my parents are like, still there, and it's funny. I don't know if I could ever really move back. I think I really enjoy not, especially now, like the world is a really different place, but there was always just something like smart about, like, to me, the Butthole Surfers, there was some brilliance to the way they tackled, like, how do you make sense of this world we live in?
Yeah. What's the subversive strain that you were talking about?
Well, I just think like, when I say a wit, there's something really funny about like, the Texas wit is always like this very dry, undersold way to throw a joke without a smile, like, and I know we're joking. My dad is so fucking funny with that stuff, and he'll just make fun of you with a smile on, without you have no idea it's coming.
Uh-huh.
And to me, that was just there was always like an added bonus if you didn't oversell the humor. And it's funny, as I've become a comedy guy, I'm not funny. I have a good sense of humor, but I'm not like, I could never go on stage and perform at the UCB, ever. But I don't know. And it's funny. I think a lot of that kind of strain of humor and subversive kind of, joking around is a very common strain among musicians. Like, all the really good musicians in my mind are fucking wickedly funny, like wickedly dry, and whatever. It's always been, I've always followed that little thread in life. It's sort of gone wherever it took me.
Yeah. There's something else you said that I thought was interesting. You said your parents were comfortable with the tension.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of curious. I don't know if this is answerable because you'd have to be in their minds, but I'm wondering, was it repressed, or was it like pushed down, or just because I asked that just because of the, like, you used the word waspy at the beginning, or was it like a true, like, yeah, this is okay having this tension around?
Like, they're sort of comfortable with it. Like, my dad, for example, like, my dad has started, I want to say 2 or 3 really sort of art museum type things, like galleries or museums. And one was like, he was involved in the Whitty Museum, which was sort of the natural history museum, and there was an art part of it. And then in the late 70s, he was involved in the San Antonio Museum of Art, which turned an old brewery into a modern art museum. And it was exciting, but no one really knew, what, like, it was, the art was very challenging to people in San Antonio. And then it slowly kind of became like any institution. It just became less forward thinking. And so a bunch of contemporary artists decided to start a gallery called Blue Star, which is still there today, and lose all of the institutional stuff. And they would meet in a Mexican restaurant. And so he's always been involved in art, and like, but whenever he's done it, it's been met with resistance. Like, people think he, like, what the hell is that on, like, yeah, when he was a lawyer, he was very big in, like, had this super modern art throughout the office. And I'm sure all the lawyers in his firm were just like, what the fuck is this?
Why is there a banana taped to the wall?
Care. Huh?
Why is there a banana taped to the wall?
Yeah, exactly. Like, pretty close. And they live in sort of the semi, it's a conservative part of town, but they have this big, they built a house, and it's this metal house, and they don't have a problem like having people go, what the fuck is that? And and it's funny, I think, as I alluded to, like, things in the world have gotten weirder and weirder. And when I don't know, it's like it can be, to me, all I know is when I got to New York, I really felt like it was nice not to, there was something very nice about just, I felt like there were so many freaks there and so many weirdos that I felt utterly at home. And I didn't feel like, oh, there's always going to be this part of the population that's scratching their head or judging me or doing anything. And I wasn't like, I mean, it's really a place for so many people who across the world who, I mean, shit, there's some people that live in New York that it's the only place they could be safe being who they were. And I was not that, but I still felt utterly like a citizen of the place the second I came in, because there wasn't that sort of confrontation, and it was just like anything goes, which I felt really freeing for me.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that you grew up having an example in your life of someone making difficult art or being into difficult art.
Yeah. And, yes, totally.
And then and seeing that they were okay with that, whatever the social reaction is going to be to that I'm going to still follow. I have the confidence to follow my own inner aesthetic compass. Absolutely.
100%. And if people get it, fine. If they don't, fuck them, and that's a hard thing to do. I mean, that's hard. And that's like, I still think they were probably more confrontational ultimately than I am, but, I've learned in my own way to like embrace that, and not to segue to Chavez, but weirdly, Chavez was much more ambitious probably than La Volta. I loved La Volta, but it was just the next thing. And Chavez, we were trying to do something that was less understandable and a little more confrontational in its own way, and definitely more ambitious. And man, we definitely, I got pretty familiar with what it was like to have people scratching their heads at what you were doing.
Really?
Oh yeah. And it was pretty humbling for all of us.
That's so weird. I mean, I remember, I forget when I first heard, I first heard Chavez, like, I guess mid-90s somewhere, maybe on some like Matador sampler. The video for somewhere. And it was just like, I instantly got it. It was in my, I'm just like, yep, this is great. Like, it was just this I just remember this instant kind of just like, this is wonderful.
That is exactly what didn't happen. I was in this band Bola Volta again at the time for whatever reason. I feel like we should be mentioned more often than what we are mentioned. But it was like, we were an established band, and we split up because we got signed, and our singer had a kid, and we just didn't make the leap like all of the bands did, like would after post Nirvana. And so so it was time to reinvent myself. And Matt Sweeney was our roadie. He was in this band called Skunk, and Matt and I really connected with what we were listening to, and he's wickedly funny, and we were just thick as thieves. And so we decided to start this band, and we lucked out and sort of got the drummer James Lowe, who was in Live Skull, who we had all known about for years and years, and I'm still to this day sort of starstruck by him. So anyway, we started this thing, and we knew we wanted to do something that was like I don't know, like the Jesus Lizard or Hum or any of these bands that had really aggressive guitar parts, but also had real melody involved in them. And it took us forever we could have described what Chavez became before we started, but took so long to figure out how to do it. And man, we spent like a year before we wrote a good song, and I had to totally change the way I played guitar. I had to tune down strings to just to listen, to break bad habits and not know what I was doing so I could listen to stuff. And then we finally kind of figured it out, and I'm old friends with the guys at Matador, and I was terrified to play them our first single, but they liked it and then signed us. And Matt had been in a band, James had been in a band, I had been in a band. I mean, Matador used to make so much fun of us because they were like, "Ooh, it's a super group." I'm like, "What?" "Oh, yeah. You guys are fancy. And I'm like, "Fuck you." And so we did this record, and people, we felt a little bit of pressure that people were looking at us. And so our first record was like, this is the manifesto of what Chavez is, and this is our thing. And it was weird. Very, very few people understood what the fuck we were doing. And we would play to, and because we'd all been in bands, we got good opening slots all the time. We went on tour with Guided by Voices, and our second show was with the Afghan Wigs, who were old friends of ours. Like we really had access to, we weren't just like, we didn't need to be discovered. We were connected with people, and man, people just did not understand what the fuck we were doing. We had a German label that loved us personally. And we sent him the first record, and he was like, I don't understand this. And we had to go back to Matador. And it was weird. It was like, people thought we were like Rush or something, or like this super complicated, like math rock thing. And we were just like, what are you talking about? It's like, it's emotional. It makes sense. It's like tension and release. And so we stuck it out, and then
was that humbling? Like what was the emotion? Like what was the emotion in the moment? Because like I'm trying to like put myself in that. I'm also like, well, here's another. Let me ask this question first. Was there a point where you started to like break out of was Bullet La Volta maybe the key that broke you out of that kind of waspiness of your parents, or are you? Do you continue to that to this day? Have you gone to therapy? Like, what is the thing that maybe like opened you up a little bit to feel emotions?
Yeah, like I would put this in the kindest way. Like La Volta was just such a rush of an experience, but it was also the first time in like, signing to a major label, and like that did not go well. And that was, everyone in Boston knew we got signed to RCA, and then our record kind of tanked, and it was really humiliating. And, like just all of the things that you do when you start to find the first steps of, growing something into quote unquote success. It was like you make missteps, you correct, by the end I was prouder of the stuff that we were doing at the very end than ever. But you know, business and everything, it was just complicated. And
But some people push that stuff. So like you could have easily like just pushed it down, not even like purposely, right? You just like are set in a certain way where, or the emotions just kind of like passed by you and you just kind of like moved on. Did you feel that stuff in the moment?
Yes. And so when I moved to New York, like really, truly, we were like, let's do this thing that we always wanted to do. And it was sort of like, let's take all the shit we used to do and push ourselves. This sounds really pretentious, but like really create music that will be around in 25 years. Like no joke. And it meant like shucking all the sort of rock moves that were a little corny and rote and replacing them with other rock moves that were corny. But it was a 100% let's put all of our chips on this thing. And so much so that we were connected. Like one of our good friends was the manager of Nirvana and Dinosaur and Sonic Youth and all these things. One of our lawyer, my former lawyer, was like, you know, the big, huge lawyer of all those bands. And, you know, we could have had any of that. And we literally said, like, fuck it. Let's not use any of our connections. If we're meant to be, you know, it sounds ridiculous, but this is true. Like, it should be about the music, and either people are going to connect to it or they're not. And let's live or die by that. And like, I think we got an offer from Elektra, and I didn't even call the guy back. We were just like, fuck it. Let's not do major label stuff. Let's do our friends who are Matador. And this is all the right way to do things. And it'll either happen or it won't. And if it doesn't, then, you know, we did it the right way. And if it does, then it did. And it turned out it didn't happen. But it was really like, that was overt. And it was, you're trying to keep steering it back to the emotional thing. And that's true. It just was like, it sounds pretentious, but to make yourself vulnerable and take risks creatively and listen and follow your path. And even if people think you're crazy or don't understand what the fuck you're doing. And I mean it, like Chavez, like at a certain point with our second record, which we thought was even better, not even better, but like a really good second record.
Yeah.
Like we would go on tour and like kill it with Guided by Voices in Detroit and then go play in, you know, some record store the next time and the next day. And then we were like, okay, the next time we play Detroit, people are going to be there and it's going to be great. And then like 20 people would be there. And at a certain point, we just decided like, well, fuck it. If this, no, we were not surging. No one seemed to care. It seemed to be making no impact on anyone. We were kind of big we were okay sized. Like people came to see us in Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. And that was kind of it. And it was sort of humiliating. I mean, at that point, we'd all been in bands for like 5 years and for 10 years. And we were like, man, we're drawing fewer people now than ever. And that's not the contest you need to win, but we were definitely like, fuck it. If no one seems to care, then let's just do whatever we want to do and stop trying to make a career out of it. And that was also kind of freeing. We just said, fuck it. Like, let's just do what we want to do and nothing more. And so we began to do other things, and we would just play shows we thought were interesting, not shows that we had to play. And it was this weird thing because as time caught up with us, it also became clear the less we played, the more popular we became. And Matt ended up going off to do Zwan, and I ended up starting screenwriting and stuff. That's a funny story. But when he was off doing Swan, he came back to town and he pulled me aside and he was like, dude, something weird happened with Chavez. I was like, what? And he was like, I don't know what it is, but all these kids really like us now. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, our stinking corpse is like appealing to these people. I don't know what it is. And I literally thought he was joking. And I don't know, it's been very nice. Like, you know, it's just been gratifying that like people, like you said, you seemed surprised that no one was particularly interested at the time, but no one was particularly interested.
Well, it's just timing is so interesting to me. Like whatever your aesthetic is, you in general, not you specifically, whatever someone's aesthetic is, like when I got to New York, I always wanted to be a sketch person. Right. And I grew up on Kids in the Hall and Bob and David and Mr. Show and the UCB sketch show. But I didn't go to New York until like I went to grad school. I thought I was going to be a professor. I don't have to go into the whole story, but basically like I went like way later than those influences would have helped me. Right. If I had gone right after college to New York to do comedy, I would have been right in the thick of like all the other people that had been influenced by that and part of that scene. But I ended up going after sketch died for whatever, like videos had started to like YouTube had started to take off by the time I got to New York, and sketch was pretty much dead there. There were a couple like sketch groups that were like well known, but no one like really that had taken off. Like Derek had left, which was, what's his name? I can't think of it, from Community. Donald Glover. That was his sketch group. So they had taken off and they had all gone to Los Angeles before I had even got there. So the thing that like really inspired me and made me want to do comedy, by the time I got there, no one was interested in the thing that I wanted to do.
Right.
And then I had to figure out what I was really going to do from there. Because it was just bad timing. Yeah. And
those are good moments, though.
Well, they're good moments in retrospect.
Yes, in retrospect.
At the time, they're
not enjoyable.
No. They're like, why am I...
But in retrospect, it's like that. I mean, Matt and I used to joke that we missed the alternative nation revolution. We missed all the cash and prizes because we were both in bands up until then. And then when it really blew up, we were starting Chavez and taking a year off. In fact, I had to work at MTV, and I was old friends with the Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, they opened for us a couple of times, and I remember I had to have a job at MTV, and one of the jobs was like working this, Smashing Pumpkins were playing, and I had to wear a headset, and I turned to James Eha, and I was like, man, look at us. After all these years, you're about to go do this performance on MTV. You're a total rock star, and I have this thing on my head. And but it was just the way it was, and
it didn't. That didn't bother you?
Of course, it was humiliating. Yeah, it bothered me, but it was also like Matt and I, like. It was also sort of clarifying. We both were like, well, we missed it. So what? We'll just do our own thing. And man, there was no sense of like the 90s in New York indie rock being anything other than, us and our friends.
Yeah.
But that was really fun. And now I think people look back on that as sort of its own form of a golden age. And so in a weird way, as thrilling as that whole, indie rock becomes huge with peaking with Nirvana that La Volta was, this was a much less business oriented, much less career oriented thing. And it was smaller and kind of way more, not more fun, but it ended up being a really nice place for Chavez to be. And so,
yeah. Well, you can't control the timing. You can't control that stuff, but you can control your own creative expression. And I think that's the thing that, as long
as sometimes if you have to dig deeper because you're not just part of a whole thing, or you're not just like, I I mean it. We were La Volta was swept up with this whole movement. It was a cultural moment. Like, it was a huge thing. In Chavez, we had to sort of make up as we went, and in a way, it was, just as gratifying because it was creative and forced you to think in different ways because some things were tired. It's like you're saying about sketch comedy at the time, it being over forces you to be a little more innovative, I think, to make any kind of impact and to grow,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it made me figure out what I like that. Also, I'm an okay performer, but I'm a great writer. And so it made me realize oh, okay, well, that's the thing that I should be putting my energy into, really developing that as my skill, as opposed to splitting it between performing and everything else that I could be doing. But I kind of want to go back to we're right at the end, and I want to go back to the identity thing, because I think that's interesting. And I'm curious, because I read last night, I was trying to find some information about your childhood online, and I found an article that you had written about I think in New York Times in about 2011 about being a dad, and that being and your identity being wrapped up in being a musician.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious about how did you figure out your identity, as your creative identity or any other kind of parts of you, as you were growing up? And what was it about musician that helped kind of crystallize it to the point where it was difficult to shake even afterwards, even after you'd become a screenwriter? And then I'm going to guess, it was still tough to shake even when you were writing TV and show running and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think to me, life was all about preparation. Like, you had to do the next thing, or, I loved playing music and I loved playing in orchestras, and that was useful. And I loved playing basketball, and that was good, being part of a team, and going to a fancy college, getting into a fancy college and then going was exciting, all that. But it wasn't until literally starting that band and being a part of starting it. I mean, I don't want to take credit for it. We all did it together. And just seeing that you could do something. I remember this very smug, I just felt like for the first time in my life, I was actually doing something, not preparing to do something. And it was a thrill. And I remember very clearly, after college, everyone was sort of starting to figure out, wait, well, I have to go find a job, and trying to get internships at places. And I'm sure people I knew were trying to get an internship at the Boston Phoenix, which is sort of the Village Voice of Boston. And La Volta was on the front page of it, and it wasn't that, press and all that stuff. I didn't care about that, but it was I'm doing something relevant I'm creating something. I'm actually, there's no alienation here. I'm in a band doing a thing, and we're doing I'm a guy being in a band. It's the best. And that, when I look back on it, I've never not been doing something creative ever since that moment. I had to have, I worked at MTV while we were starting Chavez. I've had to be practical,
right? For
sure. I've taken jobs for money, and I still do. But but I've always done something. I've always had a project that was my thing, and a lot of them never see the light of day, and some do, and some are ignored, and some, people like. And but that's all. From that moment, I kind of I knew that's sort of what I wanted to do, and I never wanted to not be that. And it's funny, I have a cousin who married Bill Callahan, and she did a movie of him. It was quite good. And I think that's kind of how they met. And a movie about him, a little, sort of tour documentary thing. And he had some quote, and I don't really know him that well, but but he had some quote that was just like, once he realized he wanted to do music, he's like, time stopped. I just knew that's what I would do and nothing. And he meant, but in a good way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that there was a clarity. And for me, I wouldn't say time stopped. I knew that I've been super fortunate to have like the stuff I've done evolve from music to, you know, I did it, you know, while I was working at MTV starting Chavez, I did this thing with Jesse, who was in the Lemonheads, Jesse Peretz, and my roommate in college, Donald Logue, and it was this cab driver character on MTV. And we did that because we just wanted to do something. Jesse came up with the initial idea and we just did it. And I'd never directed anything. And from that, you know, MTV wanted to turn it into a movie. So I decided, what the fuck, I'll learn how to write a script. And from that, you know, I got that movie never got made, but I was fortunate enough to got turned into a writing career, which I never intended. And so I've always had, you know, I've always like had something super creative, and it all goes back to that moment in, you know, my first band, which was realizing you can actually do this. I mean, it was really exciting, and I still feel that way. And so, you know, as much as I'm a professional in the world of film and video, TV and all that stuff, it's like, it's funny. I still, to this day, completely identify as, you know, the musician part of me. I never feel like intimidated by musicians. I always feel like this, this like, you know, we're one thing and the rest of the world is civilians. And it's silly because I'm not really a musician anymore, barely. But
this is the crystallization of like you finding some way of realizing your creativity in a way that felt honest or real or whatever. I don't know. I'm just throwing words out, but like something that meant something to you. Was it the fact that this was being recognized at the same time? Like all of that stuff, something else that like that solidified that, like made that identity so difficult for you to shake.
It's funny. I don't really think of it as the recognition, because the first band was recognized, but the second one, not really. And, but what I really did feel was a part of like the like-minded group of people who did it together. And I always just felt like a part of that crew of people. I was very, very close. I'm still very, very close to Matt Sweeney and Scott Marshall, our bass player, and James Lowe. And, you know, I always just felt strength in our connection, and other people who did stuff like this, I just always did. And you know, music's a really tough game. It's a really hard thing to keep doing in some form. And like, I'm super fucking proud of Matt Sweeney, who's like, you know, managed to do some of his best. He just does great work and has this really, he's doing sort of exactly what he wants to do as a musician. And for me, you know, I sort of branched out and took this other weird trip. But I get tons of strength from those guys. It's funny. So it's like, I'm directing a movie and I just got a cut from it. And I send my movie to my musician friends first, way before I sent it to like my comedy writer friends, for whatever reason. Just because not just for that. But your question was like, is it the accolades or the impact or recognition? And for me, it's not really. It's like it's getting to do it. And like Matt Sweeney, for example, does not really want to be a rock star in any way, but he wants to be in the room where you make the music. And, you know, that's what I want to do. It's just, and I want to be where you get to do the stuff. And so that I think as a musician, I feel I identify with that much more than like I didn't come from the sketch world, even though I did direct an episode of the UCB TV show.
Really?
Yes. That's a long
awesome.
story.
See,
But that's always what Matt used to joke that I tried to do a TV show about guys in bands, and he told me something that I actually used in that, which is like, you play music because you're a musician because you can get away with it. You know, that's why you play music, because you can get away with it. And I sort of feel like the same thing with all these creative arts. It's like, you do it because you can get away with it.
Yeah. And in some way there's this fulfillment of, growing up playing team sports, like playing basketball, you said orchestra, right? Being in the orchestra, right? There's some way of that, like the camaraderie and teamwork of that, then into this form of like, you like that part of it. And then how can I use that as a way to express my creativity? Yeah.
And I love being part of a gang. Like, I would never be a singer-songwriter. I could never do it.
Yeah.
And I love collaborative projects. It's just, I'm a team sport guy.
Yeah.
And that's always what I've loved. And it's funny because I stumbled into this writing career. I hated writing. Like, I was so psyched to finish college. I was like, I'm never going to write another paper for the rest of my life. And then when I decided to do that cab driver, MTV wanted to turn it into a movie. And so I said, fuck it, I'll learn how to write a script. That way I can direct more if I, at least this is a good way to do it as opposed to writing something on spec. And so I did it. And Donal was in this bad remake of, remake of Diabolique starring Sharon Stone. And they were shooting it in Pittsburgh. And he was like, dude, you should come out and meet the guy who's like the actor with him who's playing the comic relief. He's this hotshit screenwriter and he loves the cab driver. He'll show you how to write. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And that was J.J. Abrams. And so J.J. literally taught me how to write a screenplay. And I remember after we finished that, it didn't get made, but it went well. And he's the nicest guy on earth. And I owe my career basically entirely to him. But at the end of it, he asked me if I wanted to write the studio comedy. And I remember I hesitated for a day. I was like, I don't know if I want to be a writer. Do I want to be a writer? And I asked my friends whether I should be a screenwriter on this studio project. And I also was a little worried. It was like, do I want to be a studio? Write studio comedy? And all my friends were just like, are you fucking crazy? Of course. And I did it. And that movie ended up being Joyride, which we wrote together. And it got made, which was really exciting. And it launched my career as a screenwriter. And it's only, and I was thrust into not all of the jobs, but a fair amount of them. I was stuck by myself, like just writing. And I don't like that. I like being part of the collaborative team thing. And whenever I could team up with somebody who was interesting and fun to work with, like I would be fine. But on occasion, more than one occasion, it was just me and like an executive or something that I did not enjoy being a solo screenwriter at all.
Just you and executive? That sounds like a dream.
What? I don't know. I like being part of it. And then eventually, I met Mike Judge through that, and he was a former musician from Texas. Worked at MTV. Chavez was on Beavis and Butthead. He made fun of us. And I thought, man, okay, here's another person I can really connect with. And we worked together for many, many years. And I did Silicon Valley with him. And that was really fun because I was part of a big group. And that sort of felt like a weird band. And We always treated the characters like they were in a band. We reference that all the time. And now I'm directing a movie, and I feel like I've come kind of full circle, which it felt like this is the most band-like experience I've had since I started writing. It was really fun to do it, and I'm in the middle of editing it, but I'm definitely like the collabo guy.
That seems like a nice place to end.
Yeah.
Clay, thank you very much.
Did I answer your questions?
Yes. I think I have a feeling in my body when I'm talking to someone. And by the time I get to a certain point, if that feeling is completed, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes.
I'm like, I can't like articulate exactly how you answer the question. But by the time I'm like, oh, I understand. I kind of understand you a little better now. And I understand where your art comes from.
Good.
Which is the mission of the show. So,
good. Yeah. Well, I hope I didn't go into biograph speak, but answered your questions.
No. But we used that to get there.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
But thanks. I know you were busy, so thanks for taking the time.
Of course, it was really fun.
I'm glad. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye. Bye.